Thanks for joining us on the MBP, the Micah Brown podcast. I'm your host, Micah Brown, and here I want to connect you to some interesting people in an intentional way. We do that by focusing on two main things. One, focusing on the person. Everybody goes through stuff. We all have obstacles that we face. Somebody that you may walk past on a daily basis may actually be one of those incredible people, and you just don't know it yet. A lot of times, as Americans, we want to jump straight to, what do you do for a living? And we skip right past all the personal stuff that we've been through. A lot of times we want to label that as unprofessional, and I would beg to differ. I think that by being more personal, being more intentional with our conversations, we can actually get a lot more accomplished holistically as human beings. So that's what we try to focus on here. Anybody that I interview, I want to ask what obstacles they've overcome and how it's affected them. Sometimes we'll just jump straight into it without asking the actual question. Either way, when you listen to an interview on this podcast, I want you to have met somebody in an intentional way. And the second part, get to know what they do as a profession. It is part of their life after all, so why not get to know what they do? But we don't start there. We will end there. And as many of our people that we get to interview, you'll see, they actually do some pretty incredible stuff, and we don't want to miss out on that either. I hope you enjoy the show. If you do, a fantastic way to support would be to use that Audible free trial by going to audibletrial.com/MBP. That's audibletrial.com/MBP. That'll get you a free 30-day subscription to Audible for free $99. And if you want to keep going after that, that's up to you. Either way, that will help out this podcast continue to truck on forward, paying for all sorts of things behind the scenes that I didn't realize cost money when starting this whole thing, but they do. Nonetheless, we appreciate you guys for helping us out. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Let's get to it. On today's episode, I'll be interviewing Alvin Brown and Keivon Liburd. I am intentionally interviewing them because I want to hear their stories, both personally and then also their opinions of what's going on around all of us right now having to do with race relations. As I mentioned on the last episode, I aim to connect incredible people in an intentional way. And by doing that, I want to connect Alvin and Keivon to you. A lot of times what we miss out on is the humanity of everything we're going through. We want to argue about data and statistics, and we miss out on these are human beings that we're talking to. There is an increase of us versus them mentality, and it's dividing us. And instead, I hope that by having Alvin and Keivon on this episode, we'll be willing to just listen and hear people out. Whether or not you agree with them, whether or not you fall on the same side of the line as they do, that is all secondary to just getting to know what somebody else is going through. As you'll hear in this episode, Alvin has a different experience than Keivon. Keivon grew up all over the world. I'm very jealous of where he went to high school, as you'll hear. But nonetheless, they have very different experiences. Both of them are married to white women, and that has had its own share of interesting obstacles and dynamics. But nonetheless, they both have some very encouraging words throughout the whole interview, which I must say is rather long. So if you're listening to this and you're like, it doesn't seem that long, it's because I've actually cut it into 2 different episodes, and we still didn't even get through all the questions and topics that I wanted to discuss with them. So we're going to most likely have to do at least 1, if not 2 more episodes to really get through all the material that I wanted to talk through with them. As you listen, I would ask that you listen just with open ears. That's all. Just listen with open ears, especially if their experience is different than yours. My experience is different than theirs, and you'll hear some of that. There are some similarities, but mine are very, very few to their entire life situation. Thank you. And without further ado, here are Alvin and Keivon. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me on the Micah Brown podcast. Today, folks, we have, as I mentioned, we have Alvin Brown. No relation, though I wish there was. And then also Keivon Liburd, also no relation, but not even the same last name. So I wanted to start with saying thank you for joining me. I know we're going to get into a lot of things here, just topical conversations, things that are happening around us. But before we do that, I wanted to have each of you kind of share as much or as little. It's your show. Here we go. About your story, just where you're from, family background, childhood, college, how you met your wife, kids, job, etc. Not how you met your kids. I feel like we all know how you met your kids. But just whoever wants to go first, or I can pick, but hopefully you guys can be civil on who gets to go first.
First name A, last name B, going first.
There we go.
Just that easy. So yeah, so I'm Alvin Brown. So Mike, and thanks for having me on. I guess it goes all the way back to an early Monday morning of 1980. No, just playing. I was born in 80 though. October to be exact in terms of a date.
Save it, guys. We're gonna remember that.
Exactly. Save it. Get into all my banking account information and all this other stuff. Exactly. I don't even.
What was the name of your
that.
first pet? First pet, your height and weight, street you lived
your
on.
first car.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I grew up in Sherman, Texas, which then was a small town, or roughly a city that was roughly about 25 to 30,000 people, which today it's somewhere closing in on, I guess, somewhere like 39,000, almost 50,000, somewhere between that mark. But grew up in a household. I'm the youngest of four. Grew up in a Christian household. Grandfather was a pastor. As a matter of fact, my dad's dad and my mom's dad actually were in the same quartet group when they were younger. And obviously they parted ways, went their ways, but then obviously our families came back together and for good. And so that being said, so I just grew up in a middle class working family. Lived in South Sherman, which it was, to say the least. I mean, it was a melting pot of everybody. You had folks who were middle class working families, mostly Black, Hispanic, white. We were just all together, if you will. And so growing up was just interesting. I can remember probably one of my first experiences with race was having an older white male call me the N-word at the age of 5. And so, not necessarily knowing what to do with that, that kind of just
Did you even know what that word meant at 5?
No. And so I don't know that you actually know what it means, but in terms of how it's said and how someone's actions are towards you, you get the drift that that's not good. And there's something that he didn't like about me.
Yeah.
And so that kind of just set the stage. But at the same time, my parents did well in terms of coaching me. And so everywhere we went, there was always a coaching session of, hey, we're about to go in here. And they kind of laid out what could happen. And so it was almost kind of role play before we actually went into the game. So very much almost like, and Keivon can probably relate to this, obviously being a coach, in terms of going through practice. You go through practice. Why? Because in the game, you just want it to be natural. And so it was the same thing. My parents coached me on, hey, what to do in certain situations. And so they also coached me on early on, realizing that it's likely due to academics that you're going to be the only Black person in the class. And so for the most part, in terms of just growing up, I've had to assimilate, to an all white world predominantly. And then fast forward through, middle school, grade school, junior high school, into college. I landed into DeVry University. And so majored in telecom management. So I have a bachelor's of science in telecommunications management, but it put me working basically at a Fortune 500 company that was roughly around about $2 billion. And so you walk in at the age of 19 and the only other Black person there is like a vice president of human resources, but everybody else is white. And so my first boss, he was actually an immigrant. So that's the only, I guess you'd say, minority relationship that was shared was him being an immigrant and me being a person of color. But you just kind of learn to how you must adapt if you're going to survive. And so it puts you at an interesting crossroad, because you're always going to relate to the culture in which you came from, but you also are having to assimilate to a culture that was never truly meant for you, if you will. And so that's kind of, me in a nutshell. Now, obviously today, in terms of today, I'm married to my wife, Mallory Brown, and we've been married 10 years now. We have 3 kids that are 7, and pretty much by the time this recording airs, our other 2 will have had birthdays, and so they will be 6 and 4.
Nice.
And so, yeah, so we have three kiddos, obviously living in Austin, Texas now for the past, she's been here 18, I've been here 16 years or so, and attending Mosaic as members, as well as just I've held a number of positions at Mosaic. Most recently, it's the pastor of guest experience as well as senior technology advisor. And so, yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
That was very good and nice and linear. Also, with your background, I can't imagine why you'd be the senior technology advisor.
Yeah, keeping things going. Keeping things going. March 15 hit, and as a friend once told me, he says, "Hey, man, not that you weren't doing anything before, but you went from basically from nothing to essential in a matter of 3 days with COVID." So, and that is the truth.
And I know that you're not the only one that has experienced that throughout this entire process. Man, that's a cool upbringing. I would love to ask, with just your background and everything, you mentioned assimilating. What if you could just kind of expand on that? What does that look like practically for maybe, even myself, who hasn't ever experienced having to assimilate outside of just friend circles, so what does that look like in a professional setting or even in a personal setting?
Yeah, well, it's just, certain things there. So we often tend to be blind just because we typically live life from our lens. So what we do is just kind of normal to us. And so we don't take, for instance, and it's until you get outside of your own scope. So, if I took Micah Brown to, let's just say, Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church, or even St. James Baptist Church here in Austin, that's going to feel way different than a Mosaic church. And it's just not that it's right or wrong. It's just a different expression of culture. And so you're always running into just different expressions of culture. So, for instance, I can remember very early on, folks would comment on dress, and it would be subtle things. So it's not that they were being malicious as much as it was just being unaware of, oh, you dress nice for a black guy. And you're like, what? You're like, well, wait.
You could just say I dress nice.
Right. You could have just said I dress nice. And so you don't know whether to say thank you, or you're like, wait a minute. And then you're trying to really figure out, is this person, is this someone who is subtly jabbing you and trying to basically put you in your place, if you will, or are they just truly unaware? In most cases that I recognize, there have been a few, I can count them on hand, situations where someone was just, that was just their bin, and they felt, I guess fearful, or they felt intimidated just by my presence. In most cases, it's been that folks have been unaware. So it's things like the way someone dresses, the way someone's, the bigger thing is like hair. And I know Black women can testify to this in terms of, oh, it's not even let me touch your hair. In most cases, they just reach out and grab. Like, hey, yeah. You're kind of like, hold on, don't do that.
I've actually experienced that one. I remember vividly where I was, so I can at least relate to that one. I was in St. Louis at the Arch, and this Middle Eastern woman, I have no idea where she was from, but by the way she was dressed and everything, I'm just standing there looking at something in the gift shop, and I just feel this hand, and I had much more blonde hair then. I just feel this hand reach out and grab my hair, and I was like, I'm sorry, what just happened? And she said, oh, you have beautiful hair. And I was like, thank you. Don't touch me. I had to be only like 9 years old or something, but I was so confused. I went and told my mom, and she died laughing. And she's just like, well, where she's from, they probably don't have a lot of people with blonde hair, so you're the anomaly. Congratulations. I was like, man, that was weird. Invasion of privacy. Don't touch me. I don't even know you, stranger danger.
Exactly. Exactly. And so you had things like that, or you have I remember one time we had a spread at work of it was like a lunch deal, and someone had made a comment, there's no fried chicken. And so you kind of like, okay, really?
And I
You're
know.
like, really? And so it's those things of assimilating to a white world or taking it personal. Now, before I tell the story, let me preface this to say my mother-in-law and I are on way better terms than where we started at the time that this happened. But it was coming into a family that had, I mean, the blackest thing that they saw were their shadows. Um, and so that just kind of lets you know they hail from Alabama. So everything that you can actually just think of, and then enter Alvin Brown with all of his blackness into the family. And it was the first time that my wife ever brought anybody home. But one of the things I can remember in terms of assimilating, it was kind of like, well, my mother-in-law, she asked the question, well, what does he eat? And so it's kind of, and it's like,
Goodness.
um, I eat Chick-fil-A. I eat Sonic, Burger King. We have all
Yep.
these different things that I eat. But it was just learn. It's like, well, do we give him chicken and watermelon, or what do we give him?
Dang.
It's like, well, no, you give him food. He is a person just like, you. But I think
Human being.
yeah, it's like, I think that when it's just being unaware of just certain things. And so when we're tossed into the situation of being opposite of someone else's culture, I think we go kind of shell shock, and just we just get dumbfounded in certain instances of just not knowing what to do, what to say, and truly just how to be human and really accept the humility and humanity.
Yeah. Which I think is a big piece that people are missing frequently now, is that there are other human beings that are experiencing different things than you. And instead we quickly jump to this us versus them mentality. And historically, that tends to lead to civil wars, that tends to lead to violence, that tends to lead to just the mentality. So, and that's pretty interesting. I'm even, as you're saying things, I'm thinking of one-off instances that I've experienced what you're talking about, even with like food stuff. But just a huge clarification that needs to take place is my one-off instances do not equal your lifetime experience. So
Yeah.
I know that why people that I'm friends with even are like, well, I've experienced this and I've experienced that. And I'm like, okay, sure. I'm not going to take away from your experiences. One time, two times, something like that. Okay. But we're talking a full lifetime
Oh yeah.
versus once upon a time. And those are two very different things. Keivon, I'd love to hear your story, where you're from, family background, all the same things as Alvin.
My name is Keivon Liburd, and I was born in New Jersey. I'm the son of two immigrants from a small island called St. Kitts and Nevis. And so my parents came to the States before I was born, and then my dad joined the military. So I'm an Army brat, and we moved all around. We moved from New Jersey to Kansas, then to Germany, which is where I spent the majority of my childhood. Was there from the age of 4 to 17. And then my senior year, we moved to Hawaii. And so that was a big change to the opposite side of the world. And then we go to Hawaii. My dad retires from the military. And throughout that whole time, I was in a protective bubble, so to speak. If you know anything about a military base, on a military base, you have people from all backgrounds, and everyone is on the same playing level, on the same field. There's two distinctions. There's officers and there's enlisted. But within that enlisted rank, everyone is the same. So I grew up with friends who were Asian, who were Latino, who were black, white, and everything in between. And because of that, a lot of my friends, once we came back to the States later on, didn't understand what was going on here. We lived in this world that was very different than what was going on in the States. If you think about it, nobody has any unemployment issues on a military base. Everyone literally has a job. Not only that, you all have health care. Like if I stub my toe, it's all right, let's go to the clinic. It was free. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, it was this world that was completely insulated. Like that was very different than what we experienced. So a lot of us came back to the States and we realized what is going on here. And I remember my parents had always talked about like trying to protect us from that, which is why we stayed in Germany for 13 years, was because they realized over here, there's so much that was happening that we weren't privy to. So I come back, I graduate from school in Hawaii, my senior year, and then I go to
What a
Bible
burden
school.
to live in Hawaii.
It was rough, 75 degrees every day. It never got
Goodness.
below like 68. That would be cold. It never got above 80. Everyone would freak out. Like it was nice.
Dang.
So I go from Hawaii to Columbus, Texas, which is a small town outside of Houston.
Yep.
Like
I worked
outside.
there. I worked there for 2 summers at the Pine Cove that's in Columbus, so I know exactly where that is. Yep.
There you go. So I went to a small Bible school out there for 2 years after I graduated from high school. And then after that, I went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So you can see how my scenery changed radically within the course of a few years.
Oh, yeah.
So, I go from a very multicultural background in the military bases to Hawaii, which is, I mean, every type of ethnicity you can think of, to small town Texas and then small town Oklahoma. It was a culture shock to say the least. So,
no kidding.
there I met my wife, Katie. She's actually from Texas. She's from a small town called Del Rio. It's on the border. And we met there. And it's interesting because although she is white, the town that she grew up in is 85% Hispanic. So she grew up as a minority in her town, and she actually found it weird to be around white people all the time. She's like, there are a lot of white people here in Oklahoma.
That's an interesting dichotomy of brain, like just splitting your brain. Like, I'm used to this, but society's telling me I should be used to this. And that doesn't feel
exactly
normal
right.
to me. Yeah.
Yes, the society's saying that. People look at her like, but you're white, so you should feel comfortable here. So needless to say, we went to school there all 4 years. We graduate, get married, and moved to the Dallas area. And then we lived there for 2 years. I started coaching football and teaching. I taught chemistry and coached and was athletic director for 12 years. And then so I did that there for 2 years. Then we moved to our hometown for 2 years as well. And then after that, we moved to Austin, and we've been here for 10 years now. And throughout that entire time, I've had a lot of experience seeing the difference in how you can be treated because of your race throughout those years. So growing up, when I was younger, we all were in this bubble where we all got along great and we were all friends and things were really good for all of us. And then I got to Bible school in Columbus, Texas, years later. It was the first time I heard, man, you talk white, or I'm blacker than you, or I'm, you're not black because you like such and such. So it's they add all these stereotypes to you, which they see, and then they apply them to you. Yet at the same time, you get the jokes that Alvin got about fried chicken and Kool-Aid and watermelon. So I'm like, wait, not black enough or too black? Which one is it? Like, can we go back and forth? And, Alvin talked about this earlier. There are people that are ignorant. They just don't know what they're saying. And there's people that do it on purpose. Either way, they are still affecting you, and that's when I first learned about microaggressions. I didn't know how to term it. I didn't know what that was called. And these were all microaggressions. Whether or not they meant it, each one was like a paper cut. And it just keeps happening. Every time someone mentions something about chicken or watermelon or whatever, it's a paper cut. And what sucks is that you can't really do anything about it, especially if you like it. Like, this is the thing. I love fried chicken. And there's watermelon in my fridge right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you know what soda? There's only one soda that's in my house right now, and it's orange soda. Like, so you're playing up these stereotypes where you're like, am I allowed just to be? Am I allowed to be me?
Yeah.
Allowed to be human? Or are you going to use that against me? And every time you try to use that against me to attack me, that's not right. So I went through this whole thing like Alvin. I mean, we could talk about microaggressions and assimilations all day, and I bet me and Alvin could probably bounce stories off back and forth about that. But assimilation is basically the name of the game when you're Black in America and you're not in an all-Black environment. which is most of the time. Like, unless you like grew up in one and stayed there and never left, you are not protected like that. And you're always assimilating. And it takes a lot to try to not do that. But it's like, Alvin said, if he took you and dropped you somewhere else, in a different country, you'd be like, okay, crap, I got to figure this out. I got to,
Yep.
I got to figure out, how do I survive here? What do I learn? What customs do I adapt? How do I change my talk? And that's exhausting at times, but we've learned to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can even relate to with that would be on our honeymoon, we went to the Dominican Republic, and I actually can speak a decent amount of Spanish, enough to actually get by and get through stuff. And since that experience, I've now realized two things. One, exactly what you just said. It is exhausting when you are not naturally part of a culture and you're trying desperately to figure out, like, how do I fit in without totally losing myself? And we were there for a week. So I can only imagine you zoom that out to more than a week, it gets tiring. And then on top of that, you start to feel like you're losing a part of yourself. Like, who,
Yes.
in this case, who is Micah? I like wearing workout clothes constantly. So even being in a business setting, I get worn down. Man, I got to put on another tie. I get hot. I don't like things around my neck. My head gets hot first before anything else on my body does. Like, this is exhausting. And I know these are very minuscule things. I'm just trying to make the point that what I may be experiencing as like, oh, this is tough. Again, a very minor part of my life. And even with the language barrier, one of my friends, I think last week, maybe the week before, brought up the fact that you may be talking to someone who has English as their second language. And because they can't speak English, the natural inclination is to assume that they're uneducated or assume that they're somehow less than from one degree to another because they can't clearly communicate in English. Where, and you flip the script, I'm in the DR. I can barely speak enough Spanish to understand where we're even getting taken in this car. We're supposed to be going to this little, catamaran or whatever. Then all of a sudden we get pulled over on the side of the road and he's like, oh, we're waiting for another car. I'm sorry. This is how bad movies start. Like, don't tell me that. But I've got a master's degree. I've got 2 degrees from a big university. And yet, because I can't even communicate to this guy, he's looking at me like I'm some poor white guy. Like, oh, you just stay over there. We're going to just put you in the trunk. Just stop talking. So to me, I felt very minor examples of what you both are talking about. And I can only imagine, going over the course of your life, how that can, like you said, paper cuts build up. I just imagine, as you said, this is a paper cut, that's a paper cut. I'm just imagining one paper cut in the same exact spot over and over. Man, that's going to hurt and get deep fast. May as well have gotten a knife out. So
yeah, and I don't know that it's really paper cuts all over that are getting hit. I mean, we're into multiples now, multiple times, and it's funny because I thought, as you were saying, when you talked about going into a business environment and putting on a suit, like, there are days that assimilating has become so tired. I feel like I love being Black. I didn't choose to be Black, but I so love it that God gave me this gift. But there are days that I'm so tired that I wish that I could literally take off my Blackness, put it on a hanger, put it in a closet, and live life with less complications.
that's a unique experience. And I hope that people who are listening to this pause and think about that.
It's so difficult. It's something that I know that as a kid, I wondered many times, how easy is it to be white? Like, not to try to make anyone feel bad about that.
Correct.
I remember just thinking one time, like, man, white kids can do whatever they want. Now, this is coming from a kid who loves sci-fi. I'm a nerd. I love watching sci-fi, reading sci-fi. I'm a chemistry teacher. Yeah. And so being a blurred right now is a cool thing. You could be a blurred right now, but You're talking 25 years ago, it wasn't this accepted thing. People looked at you funny because of that. And I'm like, man, it must be nice for white kids to do whatever they want. If they want to be skater kids, they can be skater kids. If they want to be nerds, they can be nerds. If they want to, dress funky, they can do that. But man, black kids, we are put in a box. You have to be this way. And if you're not, then you're strange or you're white.
Yep.
That's what you're considered. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot, y'all. Take those expectations off of us.
And just real quick, for those of us that are uninformed and ignorant, a blurred is a black nerd?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I heard you say that, and I was like, okay, put it together real fast. What is he saying?
I apologize.
Got it.
Yes, a black nerd. Yes, a blurred.
And, of course, on this episode, it's like I know both of you, so you may say something or intentionally not say something thinking like, oh, Micah knows this, like, so whatever. But plenty of other people might be listening to this, so we got to make sure we define terminology when we're talking. I wanted to ask I know we gave the overview and kind of the run through real quick. Before we move on to kind of some topical conversation, I wanted to ask about just one event, and then as much detail as you want to get into, that's up to you, but one event in your life that helped to shape your character and how. Of course, the how is, where we can connect with you on a much more personal level, but one event in your life that helped to shape your character and how. Alvin, I guess you went first, so you may as well, A, B, go again.
Oh, man, one event. Oh, that one.
Just one. We got to give Keivon some time to talk too,
Yeah, one event that was quite pivotal. I think for me, there was a pastor. His name was Jeff Reed, and he had a daughter by the name of Brooklyn Reed. And we're still friends to this day, but they lived around the corner. It was all white church, First Avenue Baptist Church. So that just kind of gives the name. In Sherman, Texas, you can probably still look him up, but he took a liking to me, and it was interesting because I remember going to the church and there would be looks of, kind of like, who's the black kid? But he treated me as one of his own. And so it's interesting to have a pastor that is in the mid to late 80s, taking to a black kid who we basically met, his daughter and we met in kindergarten. We were in the same class until she was in third grade, until they moved away. But that changed for me the course of my life, just because he was the one that spoke life. Not that my parents didn't speak life, not that other people didn't speak life, but he was the one that was truly like, hey, you can overcome this. You can actually go out and do anything that you want to do in life. Now, that was what he spoke. Now, obviously, my belief is, hey, you can do anything that God has called you to do in life. But the reality of
yes.
him speaking life over me, as a white male, to a black child, that was life-giving for me.
Yeah, man, I think
that's really cool.
If you're boiling it down to one example, that's so hard. But there's also a white man that was involved in my life, Coach Daryl Mood. He was my basketball coach in high school, and he was our defensive coordinator for football and our head basketball coach. And he was so instrumental in me becoming a coach. Like, I wanted to be like him because of the impact he made on all of our lives. And what's crazy is that he took the basketball team, which was all black kids, except for the years that my friend Robbie played. He was the only white kid on the basketball team. So it's him plus everyone
Love
else.
Robbie.
Yes. And so he was the only one that was on the basketball team, and his basketball team, all black, and Coach Mood treated us like we were kings. Like, he didn't treat us like there was anything wrong with us. And that made such a difference. I never heard one racial slur from that man. I never heard anything that spoke down to my blackness that made me feel less than. And I've heard that from other coaches. I've heard that working with coaches. As a coach myself, I've heard that about me as a coach, but I never heard that. It's crazy. That's right. You weren't coaching. Yeah. You know the coaching world.
I was a coach out in Elgin. It's not that far from Austin, but yet it's a very different world. And so I worked with black coaches, Hispanic coaches, white coaches, and still people just say things. And I've even said things unintentionally, not realizing that what I just said was just a stab in the side of my friend who is another coach. And I went and tried to apologize to him. I was like, I swear to you, I didn't say that with any intention. I just said it. Didn't even think that I had a different connotation for you.
Yeah, it's that exact thing. And now looking back even more so, I am so grateful that he wasn't like that. Like if he was different, then I don't think I would have ever got into coaching. It really made a difference for him not being that way. So I really appreciate that.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, having been a coach, I definitely can resonate with that mentality of like having coaches that then mold you and shape you and make you want to be that same person for others. That's awesome. Thank you guys for sharing both of that. Okay, so I want to transition here into more of a topical conversation. It's no surprise that at the time of this recording, and I say that because I hope that there's a day when somebody listens to this and goes, what were they even talking about? I want to get into more of the topical situation of what we're all experiencing right now in America. And it has then bled into other countries around the world, which is really crazy and cool to think about. As I've said on our podcast, as I've said, even in my own personal life, there's always going to be extremes to any subject, any topic. And unfortunately, the people who are loudest are the ones who get the most attention. And typically that's from media. That can be from somebody then taking an article and posting it to social media. That could be the one who is the topic of conversation frequently. And in my experience, knowing both of you, but knowing other people who are Black, those extremes actually don't represent they don't represent me. They don't represent you. But instead, we're seeking to have more of a dialogue of like, hey, no, the things that have been mentioned are actually happening. So what can we do to change that? So that's where I want to bring this conversation. I want to start with a question. I say we just keep the same order. Alvin, you can go first. Keivon, go after Alvin just to keep things organized. Not that Alvin is better than Keivon, he just has a better last name. So we'll start with that host bias, Micah Brown and Alvin Brown sticking together. All right. First question would be, do either of you have stories of times you've been treated unjustly, abused, or treated less than, kind of on the lighter end of it, less than simply because of your skin color? And secondly, how did those events make you feel?
Man, so countless times of being made to feel less than just based on, being judged by the color of your skin and not the, content or character of your heart. And so I think in some of those instances, like I said, it goes back and I can remember it. I can just vividly see my mother in a car, leaning over going, okay, hey, we're going to go in here. We will not be yelling. We will sit down. We will walk. We will not run. We are not going to act or give anyone the opportunity to categorize us as animals or less than human. That is what my mother would say. And it just drove the point into me that when I walk into a room, I'm the room changer. As a matter of fact, your brother sings a song when you walk into the room, but he's obviously he's talking about the Holy Spirit. He's talking about Jesus walking into the room.
A little different, but right. Same idea.
Yeah, but same idea. But as an image bearer of Christ, when I walk into a room, things change. And we understand that light dispels darkness. And so for me, I understood that I have to be on my P's and Q's, that when I walk into a room, things can shift, things can change, people's attitudes will change. And that's okay, because I deserve to be in the room just as they do. And so it is an ability of mine to really begin to have the sixth sense, or a sense for knowing when a person is uncomfortable. And so it's picking up on it in terms of the looks, And I mean, and Keivon, he probably feels this as well or has known this. I can certainly tell when someone is staring at me.
Yes, sir.
And I know from which direction it's coming from. And
Yep.
I'm like, man, if God has given me a superpower, that's it. Like I can walk into given environments and just know at 6 o'clock somebody's staring at me. At 3 o'clock, somebody's staring at me. At 11:30, somebody's staring at me. Oh, there's three now. Or I can, walk up to people and I can just tell when somebody's not into someone else or they're not into me. And that's, and that's okay. My wife, she's also white and she comes from a town, kid you not, go look it up, go search it. It's called Cut and Shoot, Texas.
Okay.
Population 1,200, 1,300 people. And so when I enter into that world, I just know you've got to be there. There are no days off. The only days off I get are within the confinement of the four walls of my home. So even when I go to step outside to water my lawn, flowers, I'm on. I have to be on. And that's just the world that we live in. And so I just understand that in terms of being treated less than, that does not mean that I have to, where a person puts you in a box does not mean that's where you have to act or act from or live from that space or place. Just because they put you there doesn't mean that's where God placed you. And so it's just living from within, knowing that no, I deserve to be here. Why? Because God put me here and I'm going to be the light that he's placed within me to dispel darkness. Doesn't always work out, but when they go low, I'm going to go high. So.
Yes, sir.
I like it. What about for you, Keivon?
So I'm going to narrow all of mine down just to police interactions. And there's so many different ways we could go with this. But for me, if I think back, what's crazy is that sometimes I think because of trauma that's done to you, you block things out. I had a friend that had to remind me of a time that she was with Katie and I. We were driving to Katie's hometown during a break. I think it was Thanksgiving break, and we're caravanning. So there's a couple cars that are driving, and I'm following the flow of traffic, just like everyone else, like literally in front of our friend and behind another car, and I get pulled over. Well, the friend that's with us doesn't get pulled over, but they pull in right next to us, and it's for speeding or whatever. I to this day, I still don't know how fast I was supposedly going or what was going on. But then they have us pulled over. They make us get out the car. Now I'm like, what? Looking back, I'm like, what was going on? But when you're 20 or 21 and you're still naive and still really don't know what's going on in the world, you're like, okay, I'm just going to listen to the officers, not having any clue what's happening. Next thing you know, 4 squad cars have pulled up around us. Why? Why do we need that for just a regular traffic stop?
We were just going to Thanksgiving lunch.
Yes,
what the heck?
Like, and how is it that the car I was following didn't get pulled over and the car behind me didn't get pulled over, but I got pulled over? And we were out there for at least 30 minutes as they're asking questions and interrogating and like wanting to know what was going on and where we're going. And somehow I leave with a warning. So if I leave with a warning, what was all that for? Was that intimidation? What was going on? I have no clue. Well, later on, I mean, it might have been a year later, we're leaving Del Rio. Now, this one happened, the one I'm telling you about, I think happened in Abilene as we were going down. Later on, we're leaving Del Rio, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the checkpoints that are all along the U.S. border, about 60 miles in, right? So people, and if you're from Texas, you recognize this. If you're not from Texas or other border states, you might not realize that this happens, that when you cross over the border initially, there's no border patrol checkpoint there. So Katie's town is right on the other side of Mexico in here in the U.S. And back in the day, people used to flow freely between the two. All you had to do was pay $1.15 or whatever it was to go across the bridge and you were going to Mexico. But once you go 60 miles into the U.S., then they have the checkpoint set up. So I come back. I stayed the summer with Katie's family, and we are coming back, and Katie's with a friend in the car behind me. I'm in the front car, and then we loaded up all of our materials, all of our school stuff, all of our things going back to campus in the car with me, and I'm ahead of them. So we get up to the checkpoint. The car in front of us comes up, They ask a simple question: is everyone here U.S. citizens? Everyone says yes. They don't ask for passports or nothing. That's all. Yes. And the car goes by like it is always done. I come up. Are you a U.S. citizen? Yes. And then where are you going? Well, I'm going to Oklahoma. Oh, really? Where are you coming from? I'm coming from Del Rio. Next thing you know, the German Shepherd that's near me jumps in my window, puts his paws on the window, rolled down, is sticking his head in the car. Now, there's no drugs. There's nothing in the car but like computers and suitcases. And then so the Border Patrol agent leans over to his friends and he's like, he says he's coming from Del Rio. And then so they start having this conversation and start asking me all these questions about where I'm coming from and why I'm coming from there. Now, I'm like, oh my gosh, what do you think I'm doing? Stealing stuff because I have a computer and a TV in the back seat? Like, you're confused. So they sit there and they ask me about where I'm going to school and where I came from and all this type of stuff. And they want to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm like, I'm a college student. My girlfriend's behind me. She's with her friend. Like, this is all of their stuff. I'm just holding in the car. We're driving together. They finally let me go, right? And meanwhile, Katie had pulled over to the side, so they're just waiting. So they come up behind, and they're like, are you U.S. citizens? Yes, and wave them on. And Katie was driving, and her friend, who happens to be black, was in the passenger seat, and they're like, you know, hey, just go through. And they're like, well, wait. Why did you stop him, but you didn't detain us? What's the difference? And that happened constantly. I mean, it happened. There was one time where, and we can never remember what's happening. I think Katie was driving and I was in the passenger seat. And once again, they wanted to know where we were from. And my driver's license said Del Rio because I was coaching in Del Rio at that time. And they were like, well, where did you go to high school? I'm like, not here. Honolulu High School in Honolulu, Hawaii. Like that has nothing to do with me living here now. What does that have to do with it? I teach at this school that you're wondering about. Like, I live here. Why does it matter where I went to high school? And this type of thing happens all the time. The excessive questioning, just the constant, like, wanting to know every single thing about your business. One time in Oklahoma, I was put in a police car. The officer was like, here, come back and sit in the car while I run your driver's license. There's no way in the world I would do that now. No way in the world. And he made me sit next to him in the car, left Katie in the car up front, and while he's running it, I'm like, what would happen if something went down right now? This is before body cam days. Nobody would know. Why am I in this car? Why is he asking me to get in this car with him? This does not feel right. These instances, like I'm telling you, I just named like 4 or 5 of them. There's so many with just interactions with the police, and thank God nothing happened. I came out unscathed, but the fact that I am fearful every time I get pulled over is not right. Like, my wife gets pulled over and she'd go off on a cop. She'll be like, no, I didn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I can't say any of that.
Right.
Yeah. He knows that, you know? And it's crazy. Those are the things that everyone would love, just not to be fearful or not to feel like you get a different set of interrogation rules than other people. It's a lot.
Mm. I mean, even just listening to it, I'm like, man, I've been pulled over a handful of times, even pretty serious stuff. Like, I probably shouldn't admit, I already did my, punishment and everything. I didn't go to jail for this. I should have. And I will admit that I did 98 in a 55 construction zone after my legal curfew with an expired driver's license.
Ooh.
And the cop walked up to my window laughing because he was like, he looks at me, he goes, you should go to jail right now, right? And that was before he even saw that my license was expired. And he sees my license. He goes, son, how long have you been driving? I said, 3 months. He goes, well, is this your first ticket? I said, yeah. He goes, you really went big and went home. I mean, that is this one's going to count. And even with that, like, I'm just imagining, like, he had more than enough reason to take me to jail, to like hit me with a big fine right there. Like, have me like call my parents or something. I mean, any number of things. And yet you're the one that's pulled over and questioned for just, in my opinion, the stupidest stuff.
Yeah.
So like, none of those are tickets. All the ones I told you about, there were no tickets. Like,
which makes me think about how people, well, the stats say, and the statistics and the information. And it's like, okay, but what about the things that are not recorded, that are not written
There's
down.
no record.
Right.
Yes, there's no record of it.
Yeah. So that just.
I mean, that's the thing that we see though. Like, and so when I get into these types of conversations, I tell people from the beginning of time, like, if streets, if roads, if trees, grass all could talk and tell you of all the stories of things that they've witnessed of people losing lives.
Wow.
Oh my goodness, what a story that would be told. And so you look at today's climate of where we stand in terms of all that's going on. We're talking about police brutality. We're talking about just any and everything that's related to racism. And the one thing that I mentioned is that a lot of people are like, well, racism is getting worse. And I'm like, no, racism is not getting worse. Racism has been there. It's just being recorded on devices.
Truth. 100%.
I go,
truth.
It's being recorded. And that's the thing that is so surprising, that's starting to wake a lot of people up, is the simple fact. I'm like, no, this stuff has been happening. It's just the fact that in our hands, we're getting news stories in a matter of an instant. Whereas before, it may not have even made the local news.
Yeah.
And you just never would have known about it. And it would have been, oh man, it was a great day in Mayberry. Well, it probably was, but outside of Mayberry, people are losing their lives. And so it's that same thing of just like, nothing is being recorded, but yet damage is being done.
I mean, even Keivon talking about sitting in the front seat with that officer makes me think about the kids that were just like kicked in the front seat. And the only reason that was even brought up was because somebody across the street had their cell phone out and was recording it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I'm like, well, shoot, if something had happened with Keivon, then that would have no one would have ever known. Katie could have tried to say something. Somebody else that maybe was a witness could have tried to say something, but ultimately how much would have that mattered? But now you have somebody who is being assaulted in a front passenger seat of a cop car where Keivon has sat, not the same cop car, of course, but figuratively speaking, you've sat in that same seat, but he's being kicked. And the reason we're finding out about it is because someone had a cell phone.
Yeah.
Crazy enough, it was though. It was
what?
It was the same city. It was while we were in college in Tulsa,
Right.
So
No way.
Yes, I mean, it's okay. Speaking,
I'm laughing because it's ridiculous at it. I'm not laughing to like downplay anything. I'm just saying like, what the heck? You're in the same city. That's why I'm laughing.
Well,
it's just ridiculous.
That part of that is also like history. So we lived in Tulsa for 4 years, went to college in Tulsa, and never heard about the Tulsa Massacre. I learned about this after I left. I didn't know about Black Wall Street, which is something that we all should have known about. This isn't taught in the history books. Like there are so many different things. There's so many things.
It's not a teak or anything. I mean,
it's not something in there that you should know about. There was a thriving community of Black people that were doing well, and folks got mad, and the KKK came out and drugged them out their homes, killed 300 people, and not one white person was arrested. And they called it the Tulsa riots for years until they realized, nope, this was a massacre of people. And I'm like, those things are what need to come out now. That's what Alvin's talking about. It's been going on. This racism isn't new. We just haven't been talking about it in this fashion where the whole world gets to see it. People know in that community, and that's about it. And I think those things got to come out.
And what's interesting, so here's one detail that's often missed. And so, like, Keivon, you're right. They call it the Tulsa riots. But when you actually go and examine the story for what it's worth, it all came down to a young Black man who needed to go to the restroom. The only restroom was on like the 4th or 5th or 6th floor, something like that. Either way, he had to get on an elevator to go up to use the restroom. They get into an elevator. There's a young white lady who's in the elevator, operating the elevator. So she's an elevator operator. She goes to, I guess, engage the elevator to go up, and the elevator lurches. And I guess in terms of that lurch, she fell back into the young man's arms. Well, because it lurched and how it lurched, she screamed. Well, when it opened up, it's kind of just one of those moments you're kind of like, oh, shoot, like this, I didn't do anything to you. You didn't do anything.
This isn't what it looks like.
This isn't what it looks like. He takes off running. Well, he took off and he ran, and as he was running out the building, they basically heard her scream again, and then obviously you put two and two together. You go, oh, we heard a young girl scream, and then moments later, here comes a black guy running out. Well, he had to do something to her, was the story. And she, even the young lady, to her credit, she admitted that nothing happened, but was coerced by the police to basically say that she was molested or raped, and by the young man. And so when you look at that, you go, thousands of people lost their lives behind this. Not just obviously the literal life, but their way of living. Gone, destroyed. I mean, there were only what was it? It was 6 black families that were in there. Like, I went and did some research on it. It was 6 black families, and they were doing so well that these 6 black families each owned airplanes.
Airplanes, yes.
Back then.
Dang.
That's just how well they were doing in life. And so, and then they also said that, their banks were doing so well that even white people came to get loans from black banks. Yeah. And so, when you think about, man, they burned this place down, Greenwood, down to the ground, under the ground, as some people would say. And it's just saddening that when you look through history, books, that this is not mentioned. And so, you get things like that. Well, then you bring it into the 80s or the 90s with the Central Park 5. I'm not going to get into that, but just go Google it for the Central Park 5. And it's so many different stories that are like that are just probably sitting out there waiting to be told. But we don't know anything about it because it's not included in history.
Yeah. I'm looking right now. There are books about it. There's one called "The Burning, Massacre, Destruction, and the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921," which it says massacre right there. That one's on Amazon. The Central Park 5, the untold story behind one of New York City's most infamous crimes. You guys can, for people that are listening to it, you can go. I'll put the links and stuff for you guys to go check those out. But you can do that through Audible, Amazon, whatever. But if we're not going to be taught it through history, then we need to teach ourselves, I think, is the kind of where the responsibility lands. I know there's the talk that black families share with their kids. Alvin, you even mentioned that your mom would kind of brief you before you walked in somewhere. Yeah. But it's different than what I typically think of the talk being. That's usually the birds and the bees and how when mommy met daddy kind of thing. But for you guys, have you had this talk with your kids, not the birds and bees necessarily, but if so, what did you say to them? How did they receive that? Kind of let us in on what that looks like for you guys as you're talking about this is a lifetime, not a once upon a time situation. How do you communicate that to your kids, especially being that both of you are married to white women and so you have mixed race kids? How do you engage in that conversation with your children? What age, how does that go, that kind of stuff?
Man, I'm going to jump in and cut off Alvin. You don't get to go first this time.
Perfect.
Man, it's so interesting because in my family growing up, my parents did not, believe it or not, give us the birds and the bees talk. But I definitely knew how to act around police officers and how to act in a store and how to act around every other place because they were going to look at us differently. We all knew, you are black, you cannot get away with the same things your white friends can get away with. And it's sad, the old mantra of working twice as hard to get half as far. We all know it, and we all might hate it, but we all subscribe to it. Horrible. We sit there I just know I have to do more in order to get to that same spot. So now flash forward with my kids, there is such a tension between how do I protect my kids and how do I let them know that the world still looks at them a certain way. And this is the hard part because no matter what, if you are, let's say 10 years from now and you're 17 and 19 and you are with a bunch of friends and they're all white, you stand out. And even my oldest, he's light, like he's light. But even then, I'm like, you can't pass. Like there's no passing. Like it's obvious that there is black in your baked into your genes. You are black, and that's how the world sees you. And yet you are also white. So it's hard to kind of navigate between those two worlds of being able to talk to them about these issues. What we decided to do was just, and this is just recently with George Floyd, to really let them into what was going on. Like I said, 7, and then my 8-year-old's going to be 9 next week. So 7 and 9, and they're young. And I thought that it was too young to start talking about this, but it's everywhere. And it's everywhere.
Yep.
And I've realized for us, when we were young, like Alvin said, 5, we were talking about it by this point. Like it was part of our lives. Like me sheltering them does them good only in the sense that, hey, they're not exposed to the world. But then if someone else exposes them to the world, then I'm going to be in trouble.
Exactly.
I can't afford to let someone else do that to them. So right now, what we do is we make it clear that you are black and that's beautiful and that's amazing and your hair is amazing and your skin tone is amazing. And these are the things going on in the world, and people are fighting and arguing and talking about this, but Black lives do matter and you matter. And we're going to have these conversations. And what these police officers did was wrong, but not all police officers are wrong. And it's very clear that you should not do this. And we want good police officers to be out there and not any ones that are going to cause us any harm. So it's a hard conversation, but we're starting it now. And we're going to keep it going. One thing I noticed, we just can't stop. I can't think that I can have a conversation today and then be done and not have it again. I'm going to have to talk about it next week, next month, next year. You just have to keep it going and frame it in a good way.
Yeah,
Alvin.
I think to add, to add to that, because I agree with everything that Keivon is saying. It's one of those things of little did we realize we were being introduced to the world at a very, very young age. And so I agree with, with everything. Like we have to keep the conversation going. My boys are the same. Matter of fact, one of my sons, my youngest, is you might as well. I mean, to a certain extent, our neighbor calls him the Navy SEAL. The boy is a good shot.
That's pretty awesome.
I mean,
he loves his guns,
loves his guns, loves his weapons, loves his bow and arrow. You put it in, and he's been that. We have a picture of him at the age of 2 in a diaper, and he's looking down the scope of a little BB gun, and can hit cans, can
just
do
ready
everything.
to rock.
Now, while that's cute right now, because the world doesn't really deem him as a menace. But where that starts to change is somewhere around his teenage years. And then now I've got a problem on my hands. And so, but that starts today. And so it's like, we're having to teach him. So like, hey buddy, listen, we cannot allow you to go out in the front yard with those guns. Like, we just can't do that. Well, why not? Well, we live in a world that is a different place. I know that that's what you love to do, but the reality is, like, we have to begin to teach them about that. And for me, that is a big concern, that I have a son who will be ultimately deemed black, and he's not going to get another fair shake. And so it's, reading books, and my wife has done a fabulous job in terms of stocking our home with books. Books about race, books about Black people who invented things. There are stories that I share with them, just about folks who I've come across who are Black who invented, like Garrett A. Morgan, I believe, invented the gas mask. He invented the stoplight. And so there are things that once you understand where you come from as a culture, you begin to realize, like, well, everything wasn't as white as it's made to be. That Black culture had a contributing hand into this society, into some of the very things that we have grown to come, near and dear to and depend on. and that's not taught, but that starts, with us. And so,
That's important. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's, do I have to have the talk? I believe that there are certain things that God has placed on my heart of just realizing and seeing that my sons will never have to deal with, and they won't be burdened or hassled by certain things. Whereas there are other things that they will be hassled by. And it's not necessarily them as much of it is as how the world sees their dad. And so
Alvin,
so it's just that notion.
man, I've thought about your youngest son a couple of times because I know he has that love for hunting, and he could be in camo and he'd be decked out and he's ready to go shoot
And it's
and go.
130 degrees outside.
Yep, and he don't care. But then I've also thought the same thing as you, that man, if he's in the front yard, is that the same thing as young Micah being in the front yard carrying around a gun? And I think about Tamir Rice. Every time I see a picture of Tamir Rice, it breaks my heart. Like I can't. So someone was talking about, his birthday the other day and how he would have been 18, and it just seeing his face breaks my heart, because if you've seen that video, it's under 2 seconds that the police show up and shoot him. And the person who called 911 said it's probably a toy gun. And it's like, there's this they don't call 911 if you think it's a toy gun. And if you saw a little white kid roaming around, which I've seen playing whatever game they're playing with their guns, do you call the cops for that? And that breaks my heart, because your son should be able to have that gun and not have a problem. He should be able to do those same things. How do we make it so that everyone sees other people, other groups as equal, and afford them the same respect? They afford them the same, what's the word I'm looking for? Dang, it just dropped out of my head.
Opportunity, or?
Yeah. When you assume the same assumption, that you would give anyone else, like that, it doesn't make a difference what his skin color is. That little boy can play with his toy gun, that's fine. But we don't do that. And I think that's what we're digging deeper down into. And that's what it really gets into. How do we change the way that things are looked at in this country? And it's hard. It's multifaceted. There's so many layers to it. It's individual and it's systemic. Like there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah,
that implicit bias.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, even as you're talking about the toy guns and stuff like that, for me, I think of so I've mentioned this, I think, on the podcast. If I haven't, here it is. I grew up in a cul-de-sac where if you're facing my front door, I can still drive. It's in Austin, so I can drive over to 15 minutes from here. But if you face my front door, the home to the right were first generation immigrants from Ghana, Africa, and I was best friends with their son Stephen. And then on the left, they're second generation Latino or Hispanic family. And I apologize if one of those, descriptors offend somebody. I can't remember which one is the offensive or the regular one. But there, I know Keivon's laughing at me right now. I'm trying, guys. I'm trying. But but either way, I grew up with neighbors that literally didn't look anything like me, And as you're talking about toy guns, I vividly remember a Christmas where the Adais got Steven and my parents, they went in together, got us the laser tag systems, like the old school, little gray, black with the orange tip, all that kind of stuff. Nice. And we would chase each other around in the front yard. And we'd just be running around, literally shooting at each other. It's laser tag, but we were shooting at each other, pointing guns at each other and acting like we're getting shot, because we're little kids. And we're like, oh, I can't, falling to the ground and stuff. And I'm just thinking how it never even crossed my mind that there was anything wrong with what we were doing. And we were older than, 3 or 4 years old. We were like 8 or something, 7 or 8, somewhere in there. So I just think it baffles me that, and that's, I don't know, there's a lot of different directions to see it all go. But I just think that the idea of a kid who, like you said, the call even being made was he probably has a toy gun. Like it's probably a toy. And yet there's still, that officer had some sort of either lack of training, had something going on in his mind already that he was playing out a scenario. Like that's to me what I've talked about, where there are extremes, of course, but for the majority of us, we're like, no, we're not anti-cop. We're anti that situation happening again. That should not happen again, period. How does it make you feel when other black people say things like, well, the first step is to getting rid of racism is to stop talking about it? I know I have friends that have posted the meme with, oh my gosh, he was God and Bruce Almighty. He was in
Jim Carrey?
I am blanking on
No,
my
Morgan Freeman.
No, Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman.
Yes. Yeah, you
Goodness
say God.
gracious.
Yeah.
He plays God. He's got that soothing voice. But they post the meme with his little quote of like, well, the first thing is to stop talking about it. You'll be a man, I'll be a man, and that's fine. So to you guys, since you're on this episode, you're the ones being interviewed. How does it make you feel when even other black people are saying that?
I think to a certain extent, it's a matter for me of really asking, if that's the case, if we're going to stop talking about it, then, for that person, whatever comes, you can't say anything about it. So if that's the stance that you want to take, then if you go on and live your life and other people treat you less than because, or treat you worse, or mistreat you in some way because of the color of your skin, shut up. I don't want to hear about it. Don't cry about it. Don't do it. That's where I stand when you come to me with that.
That's a good point.
because the reality is this. I'm like,
you can't have it both ways, kind of thing.
I didn't stand in line to get this paint job. I didn't choose it, but guess what? It was chosen for me. So if God chose it for me, there must be a reason for it. And if he doesn't ignore it, then who are we to ignore it? Now, that being said, I look at racism and I go, racism at the end of the day is about sin. And if we look at the undertone of racism, it's really fear. That's really what it is. It's a fear. It's a fear of being inferior to some other person because of the color of their skin. That's it. And it's sad to think that, it's like, well, no, I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. But how much better could we be together? That's not a thought. It's a thought of, well, that person, and especially if you start looking at it from slavery. So like, I give you this example. Slavery still exists today. It's just really subtle. You just don't really see it. So for instance, and this is my example, and I look at sports, especially basketball and football. If you look from top down to the bottom, 85% of the players are black. Well, let's start looking up through the ranks. Now, that's why you got things like the Rooney Rule. So where you have to hire minorities or a certain number of minorities. So you got to start hitting quotas. Well, if you look across like ownership, there are no black owners. Well, then you get one and it's like, well, there's Michael Jordan. It's one of you. That's enough. It's like, well, no. So a lot of people are like, well, how do you consider that slavery? These people are getting paid millions of dollars. And I'm like, okay, yeah. That's what you want us to buy the line on. You want me to buy the line that they're making. They're not being harmed. They're not being, in comparison to, actual slavery. Oh, they've got it made. That's what you want me to buy into. But the reality is, think about the draft for a minute.
Ooh.
Think about the combine.
Yeah, go there. Yeah, the combine.
Think about this. We're looking at men based upon height, on strength. That's how slaves were determined. How many bags of cotton can you carry? Okay, well, how fast can he run? How high can he jump?
Yep. Run, jump for me in your underwear so we can see.
Right. That's how slaves were chosen. And so that's where the education comes into. It's like, no, I can't stop talking about racism, and I have to talk more about the subtleness of all of it, of the NBA, of the NFL. I applaud Goodell for coming out and apologizing about Kaepernick, but let's talk about getting the man a job.
For real.
Let's talk about getting minorities into ownership roles. I appreciate your apology, but let's really start talking about actual change. So for me, that's where when people say, hey, let's stop talking about racism, like I go, if we're going to do that, we might as well debunk the entire society and economy we've ever known, like all the way back down to the foundation in which it was built on.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the Micah Brown podcast today. This episode is just one of many. I know it will be a continuing conversation with Alvin and Keivon. Even what you just listened to is not the full interview that we had. The full interview was a total of about 3 hours. So we are chopping that up into multiple episodes, and we will even then still probably have to get them back on for more content to have. I had a whole list of like, I think 2 or 3 sheets worth of questions just to talk to them and pick their brain of how they view the world and how they view the situations we're going through. That being said, I hope that what you heard today is encouraging to you. I will make sure that resources are well documented on my Facebook profile, on the Instagram, Twitter, everything, so that you have access to any books that we've mentioned. Don't forget that you can get your free Audible trial, the 30-day Audible trial. And if a book is mentioned here that you want to start just cramming into your brain and getting more information, more knowledge, that sort of thing, don't forget about that. Don't miss out on that. That's a good, easy way to at least crank out one of the books that have been mentioned on this show, this interview. And last but not least, if there are books that we have recommended, I will try to get you the Amazon links so you can go directly to that page. That's a great way to support this podcast to continue to get better. I do want to get back to posting videos, but not having a webcam can make that a very convoluted process. So supporting the podcast would allow me to then get a webcam to then produce a better product for you guys and make sure that y'all are well connected and seeing everything and hearing everything just perfectly. That's about it I have for you today. I look forward to the next episode. Y'all take care.